Ambassador Sarah Chen stood before the towering crystalline beings, her diplomatic training keeping her voice steady despite the ice-cold fear spreading through her chest. The Zephyrian council chamber stretched endlessly upward, its walls pulsing with an alien light that hurt human eyes to look at directly. She had spent 3 years learning their customs, their language, their protocols. 3 years trying to build a bridge between two vastly different species. "Honored crystalline ones," she began, using the formal address that had taken her months to pronounce correctly. "Humanity requests clarification of your recent declarations. Our colonies on Kepler 442b and Proxima Centauri were established through proper territorial surveys. We found no evidence of prior claims. The largest Zephyrian. Its crystalline form, shifting through colors Sarah had no names for, emitted the harmonic frequencies that served as their speech. The translation device in her ear converted the sounds into words that chilled her to the bone. Human entity Chen. Your species has contaminated 17 systems with your biological presence. This contamination spreads like infection through space that belongs to pure crystalline life. The Council has voted. Purification begins in your solar cycles numbered 7. 7 days. They were giving humanity 7 days before what could only be described as genocide. Sarah's diplomatic mask almost slipped. Almost. Honored ones, surely there can be negotiation. Humanity has much to offer in partnership. Our biological systems could complement your crystalline technology. We could share knowledge, resources, even help you expand into systems unsuitable for your kind. The Council's collective harmonic response sounded like breaking glass. Through her translator, their words came as a death sentence. Biological contamination cannot be negotiated with. It can only be eliminated. Your species will be sterilized from all systems. This is the way of purity. The transmission ended abruptly. Sarah found herself alone in the empty conference chamber aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Edge, staring at blank screens that moments before had connected her to humanity's executioners. Her hands shook as she activated the emergency beacon that would carry news of this conversation back to Earth at faster-than-light speeds. 350 light-years away, in the gleaming halls of the United Earth Defense Council, Sarah's message arrived during what had been a routine budget meeting. Admiral Marcus Rodriguez read the transcript twice before the words fully registered in his mind. Around the conference table, the faces of humanity's military leaders shifted from boredom to disbelief to cold, calculating fury. 7 days, Admiral Rodriguez said aloud, his voice carrying the weight of 3 billion years of human evolution. They're giving us 7 days to accept extinction. General Liu Wei, head of the Colonial Defense Forces, was already calling up holographic displays of human space. We have 47 settled worlds, 12 military outposts, and approximately 800 million souls in our colonial territories. Our fastest evacuation ships could maybe save 10% of them. Evacuation to where? Admiral Rodriguez asked. They're not talking about conquest. They're talking about sterilization. Complete elimination of biological life from any system humans have touched. Dr. Rebecca Foster, the Defense Council's chief xenobiologist, studied the translated Zephyrian communications with growing horror. Their terminology keeps using words related to contamination and infection. I don't think they see us as a competing civilization. They see us as a disease to be cured. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the building's life support systems. Systems that might soon be the only things keeping the last humans alive. Admiral Rodriguez stood slowly, his weathered face showing every one of his 60 years. He had fought in the colony wars, survived the Titan Rebellion, and spent his entire adult life preparing humanity for threats from beyond Earth. But he had never prepared for this. No one had prepared for extinction delivered with the cold efficiency of a medical procedure. We need to see what we're facing, he said finally. Get me everything we have on Zephyrian military capabilities. Contact the Science Council. I want to know how their crystalline technology works, what their weaknesses might be, and what humanity can do in 7 days that they won't see coming. The holographic displays around the conference table shifted to show the stark reality of humanity's position. Earth itself sat at the center of a sphere of human-occupied space, roughly 100 light-years in radius. It had taken humanity 2 centuries to expand this far, moving carefully, establishing supply lines, building sustainable colonies. The Zephyrians controlled a vast empire that stretched across thousands of light-years, their crystalline ships moving through space like geometric angels of death. By any rational calculation, humanity had no chance. The technology gap was measured in millennia. The Zephyrians had been manipulating space-time when humans were still discovering fire. Their crystalline forms were nearly indestructible, their ships were grown rather than built, and their weapons could restructure matter at the atomic level. But rationality had limits. And as Admiral Rodriguez looked around the table at humanity's finest military minds, he realized that none of them were thinking rationally anymore. They were thinking like cornered animals, like a species that had crawled up from caves and mud to touch the stars, and would be damned if anyone was going to send them back to extinction without a fight. "There's something else," Dr. Foster said quietly, her voice cutting through the grim silence. "I've been analyzing their communication patterns, their declared motivation for this purification. I think there's something they haven't told us, something they're afraid of." General Liu Wei looked up from his tactical displays. "What do you mean?" "Their concept of contamination isn't just physical," Dr. Foster explained, pulling up linguistic analysis charts. "When they use their word that translates as infection, the harmonic resonance suggests something deeper. They're not just afraid of biological life taking up space. They're afraid of how biological life changes space itself." Admiral Rodriguez felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Changes it how?" "We've always assumed that our faster-than-light travel works by folding space-time, creating artificial wormholes that we slip through. But what if we're not just traveling through space? What if every time we use FTL drive, we're actually altering the fundamental structure of space itself, making it more conducive to biological life and less stable for purely crystalline existence?" The implications hit the room like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't just been expanding into Zephyrian territory. They had been transforming it, making it uninhabitable for crystalline life forms. Every human ship that jumped to faster-than-light speeds, every colony that established itself in a new system, every breath that billions of humans took in the void between stars, all of it was gradually changing the universe itself. "So, they're not just committing genocide," Admiral Rodriguez said slowly. "They're fighting for their own survival. They truly believe it's us or them." "Which means," General Liu Wei added with grim understanding, "they won't stop until every human in the universe is dead. Negotiation isn't just impossible, it's meaningless." The Defense Council spent the next 18 hours in continuous session. Reports flooded in from across human space as colonial governments received word of the Zephyrian ultimatum. Some colonies began immediate evacuation efforts. Others started building defenses they knew would be useless. A few, the ones furthest from Earth and most used to danger, started preparing for something else entirely. Admiral Rodriguez found himself standing alone in his office, looking out at the Earth turning slowly below the orbital defense platform. 48 hours ago, he had been planning his retirement. He had served humanity faithfully for 4 decades, fought its wars, protected its interests, and was ready to spend his remaining years watching his grandchildren grow up in a universe that seemed stable and secure. Now he was planning the extinction or survival of his entire species. The door to his office chimed, and Dr. Foster entered without waiting for permission. She carried a data pad and an expression that managed to combine excitement with absolute terror. "Marcus, you need to see this," she said, dropping formal protocol in a way that told him everything about the importance of what she had discovered. The datapad showed a three-dimensional map of human space, with each star system color-coded according to the intensity of spatial distortions caused by human faster-than-light travel. The pattern that emerged made Admiral Rodriguez's blood run cold. "It's not random," Dr. Foster explained. "The spatial changes follow specific patterns based on human population density, ship traffic, and length of occupation. We're not just changing space, we're terraforming it on a scale that spans light years. Every system humans have occupied for more than 50 years shows fundamental alterations to space-time that would be lethal to crystalline life forms." Admiral Rodriguez studied the display, his military mind automatically calculating implications. "How long before these changes become irreversible? Based on current progression rates? Maybe 200 years before crystalline beings couldn't exist anywhere in human space, even if we all disappeared tomorrow. And how long before our changes start affecting their core systems?" Dr. Foster's expression grew even more grim. "At current expansion rates, assuming we continued growing at the same pace we have for the past century, 500 years before their effects reached the nearest edge of major Zephyrian territory, maybe 1,000 before it threatened their home systems." Admiral Rodriguez set down the datapad and walked to his window again. Earth continued its ancient rotation below, blissfully unaware that its children had accidentally triggered a cosmic war for survival. Billions of humans lived their daily lives, fell in love, raised families, dreamed of futures that might not exist in 6 days. "Rebecca," he said without turning around, "in your professional opinion as humanity's leading expert on crystalline life forms, is there any possibility of coexistence? Any way both species can survive?" The silence stretched long enough that Admiral Rodriguez turned to look at her. Dr. Foster's expression told him everything he needed to know. "No," she said quietly. "The spatial changes are exponential, not linear. Every year of human expansion accelerates the process, and crystalline life forms can't adapt to altered space-time the way biological life can. Their existence depends on the pure geometric structure of unmodified space." "So they're right," Admiral Rodriguez said, feeling something fundamental shift inside his chest. "It really is us or them." "It's us or them," Dr. Foster confirmed. "The universe isn't big enough for both species to exist long-term." Admiral Rodriguez stood in silence for another long moment, feeling the weight of 3.5 billion years of human evolution settling on his shoulders. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the normal sounds of the defense platform, the hum of machinery, the quiet conversations of staff, the electronic chimes of routine operations, the sounds of a civilization that had 6 days left to justify its existence. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and calm. "Then I guess the question isn't whether we can find a peaceful solution. The question is whether humanity dies quietly like a civilized species, or whether we give them a war that forces the entire galaxy to remember that Earth's children don't go gentle into that good night." Dr. Foster nodded slowly. "What are you going to recommend to the Council?" Admiral Rodriguez turned back to look at Earth one more time. Somewhere down there, his daughter was probably helping his grandson with homework. Somewhere down there, billions of humans were living the last normal days of human civilization. "I'm going to recommend that we stop being diplomats," he said quietly. "I'm going to recommend that we remember what we are underneath all the civilization and culture and technology. We're the species that survived ice ages and asteroid impacts and plagues and wars. We're the apex predators of a world that tried to kill us for millions of years before we decided to leave it behind and claim the stars." He turned to face Dr. Foster directly, and she saw something in his eyes that made her take an involuntary step backward. I'm going to recommend that we show the Zephyrians exactly why biological life conquered Earth, Admiral Rodriguez continued. And then I'm going to recommend that we show them why that was the most dangerous mistake they could have made. They want to see contamination? They want to see infection? His smile was not a diplomatic expression. It was the smile of a species that had spent millennia learning how to kill everything that threatened it. Let's give them a plague they'll never forget. The next morning, Admiral Rodriguez stood before the full emergency session of the United Earth Council. Representatives from every nation, every colony, every faction of humanity sat in absolute silence as he delivered his recommendations. When he finished speaking, the silence stretched for nearly a full minute. Finally, Secretary General Maria Santos rose from her chair. Admiral, you're asking us to abandon every principle that human civilization has built itself on. You're asking us to become monsters. No, Madam Secretary General, Admiral Rodriguez replied calmly. I'm asking us to stop pretending we were never monsters in the first place. Civilization is what we chose to become when we had the luxury of choice. But they're not giving us that luxury anymore. The vote, when it came, was closer than Admiral Rodriguez had expected, but not as close as his conscience had hoped. Humanity had 5 days left to demonstrate why biological life had conquered Earth. And as the emergency session dissolved into frantic planning committees and desperate preparation groups, Admiral Rodriguez realized that the real war had already begun. It had begun the moment humanity decided that extinction was unacceptable. Captain Elena Vasquez watched the crystalline fleet emerge from faster-than-light space like geometric nightmares made manifest. Her ship, the UES Retribution, hung in the void near the mining colony of New Johannesburg, one of 47 human settlements that would die today unless something unprecedented happened. The Zephyrian vessels weren't ships in any sense humans understood. They were grown things, crystalline structures that bent light around themselves and seemed to exist in more dimensions than human minds could properly process. As they moved through space, reality itself seemed to ripple and fold in their wake. "Fleet Command, this is Retribution," Elena transmitted on the encrypted channel. "Zephyrian force composition confirmed. 17 primary vessels, estimated total crew of 60,000 crystalline entities. They're beginning bombardment formation." "Retribution, this is Admiral Rodriguez." The response came immediately. "Execute Protocol Lazarus. Authorization code, Omega 77 Tango." Elena felt her blood turn to ice. Protocol Lazarus. The authorization to use weapons that humanity had sworn never to deploy. Weapons that violated every treaty they had signed, every principle they had fought to uphold since leaving Earth. "Sir, confirming Protocol Lazarus authorization," she responded, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. "Beginning deployment of hunter-killer nanite swarms." Below them, the mining colony of New Johannesburg was home to 200,000 humans, families, children, scientists and miners and teachers and dreamers who had traveled hundreds of light years to build something beautiful on a world that had never known life before they arrived. The Zephyrian fleet began its attack with surgical precision. Their weapons didn't explode or burn or tear things apart. They simply converted matter from one state to another, restructuring the atomic bonds that held human settlements together. Buildings became dust. Atmospheric processors became clouds of disconnected particles. People became nothing at all, so quickly and completely that they never had time to understand what was happening to them. Elena watched 100,000 humans die in the first 30 seconds of bombardment. She watched the elementary school her daughter had attended during Elena's previous assignment simply cease to exist, along with all the children inside it. She watched the hospital where she had been born during her parents' colonial service stint dissolve into component atoms. Then she watched something else, something that made the Zephyrian fleet pause in their systematic destruction. The hunter-killer nanites that Elena had released weren't visible to normal sensors. They were designed to be undetectable until the moment of activation, self-replicating machines barely larger than viruses, programmed with one simple directive: consume crystalline structures and reproduce. The lead Zephyrian vessel began to change. At first, it was just a slight distortion along one edge, a barely perceptible irregularity in its perfect geometric form. Then the irregularity spread, eating through the crystalline matrix like acid through metal. Within minutes, the entire forward section of the ship was dissolving, its crew simply falling apart as the nanites converted their crystalline bodies into raw materials for reproduction. Elena felt nothing. No satisfaction, no horror, no remorse. 3 days ago, she would have been court-martialed for even suggesting the use of such weapons. Today, she was following direct orders from humanity's highest military authority to deploy them against an enemy that had declared the total extinction of her species. The Zephyrian fleet's response was immediate and devastating. Instead of continuing their measured bombardment of the colony, they turned every weapon they possessed on the UES Retribution. Elena's ship lasted 14 seconds under that concentrated fire before its hull began to sublimate into plasma. She died knowing that she had killed one Zephyrian vessel and its 3,000-member crew. She died knowing that the nanites she had released would continue reproducing and spreading until they found more crystalline targets. She died knowing that humanity had just abandoned every principle of civilized warfare they had ever embraced. Most importantly, she died knowing that her death was being recorded and transmitted across the quantum communication network to every human military unit in the galaxy. Across human space, similar scenes played out with mechanical precision. The Zephyrians had calculated their campaign perfectly, arriving at 47 human colonies simultaneously to begin the systematic sterilization of biological life. They expected some resistance, perhaps some desperate last stands, certainly some attempts at evacuation. They had not expected humanity to deploy weapons that violated the laws of physics, as most civilized species understood them. On the agricultural world of New Eden, Commander Sarah Kim watched crystalline entities burn alive as her molecular acid warheads converted their bodies into corrosive plasma. On the research station at Wolf 359, Lieutenant Marcus Chen released quantum disruptor mines that caused space itself to become hostile to crystalline life forms. On the frontier colony of Haven's Rest, Colonel Maria Santos activated gravitational implosion devices that created artificial black holes in the middle of the attacking Zephyrian formation. Each colony died, every single one. 200 million humans perished in the first wave of Zephyrian attacks. Their settlements converted to sterile dust with clinical efficiency. But 47 Zephyrian fleets also suffered casualties that their species had never experienced in 10,000 years of galactic expansion. Weapons that consumed crystalline matter. Weapons that altered the fundamental structure of space to make it uninhabitable for their kind. Weapons that turned their own indestructible bodies into weapons against their fellows. In the crystalline command ship approaching Earth, Supreme Crystalline Entity Zur-Athan received casualty reports with something approaching disbelief. In a single day of combat, the Zephyrians had lost more vessels than they had in the previous millennium of expansion. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were using weapons that seemed specifically designed to kill crystalline entities. Analysis of human weapon systems, Zur-Athan harmonically commanded. Supreme One, responded the tactical entity. Human weapons demonstrate complete understanding of crystalline molecular structure. Their devices target our specific physiological vulnerabilities with precision that suggests extensive prior research. Prior research conducted when? Unknown, Supreme One. The weapon designs appear to have been developed recently, but the underlying principles suggest centuries of crystalline physiological study. Zurathan's form shifted through colors that indicated profound disturbance. The humans had been studying crystalline biology while conducting diplomatic negotiations. They had been preparing weapons of mass destruction while discussing peaceful coexistence. They had been planning genocide while pleading for understanding. Orders, Supreme One? Continue sterilization protocols, Zurathan decided. Biological contamination must be eliminated regardless of cost. But deep in the geometric consciousness that served as Zurathan's mind, something like doubt began to form. The humans had revealed capabilities that suggested their species was far more dangerous than initial assessments indicated. Not more technologically advanced, but more fundamentally ruthless, more willing to violate the basic principles of civilized existence if survival required it. On Earth, Admiral Rodriguez stood in the Defense Council's war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the death of 47 human colonies in real time. Every red dot that winked out represented hundreds of thousands of human lives. Every tactical report that scrolled past described the complete obliteration of settlements that had taken decades to build. He felt nothing. 3 days ago, watching a single human die would have filled him with anguish. Today, watching 200 million die was simply data to be processed and acted upon. Report, he ordered. General Liu Wei stepped forward, her face haggard from 3 days without sleep. All 47 target colonies have been sterilized. Total human casualties, 198,400,000 souls. Zephyrian casualties, approximately 50,000 entities. 47 vessels destroyed or disabled. Nanite dispersal status? Hunter-killer swarms have achieved reproductive independence in 39 of 47 systems. Conservative estimates suggest they'll consume all available crystalline matter in those systems within 72 hours. Admiral Rodriguez nodded. The nanites weren't just weapons. They were a biological plague designed specifically for crystalline life forms, engineered to spread and reproduce until they had consumed every trace of Zephyrian presence in infected systems. Once released, they couldn't be recalled or controlled. They would continue spreading until they ran out of crystalline matter to consume. Gravitational mine deployment? Successful in all targeted systems. We've created artificial zones where crystalline entities cannot maintain molecular cohesion. The mines will remain active for approximately 6 months before power depletion. And the quantum disruptors? Dr. Foster, looking like she had aged a decade in 3 days, answered this one. We've successfully altered the fundamental properties of space-time in 12 systems. Crystalline life forms can no longer exist in those regions. The changes appear to be permanent. Admiral Rodriguez studied the strategic displays with the cold efficiency of a machine. Humanity had lost 200 million people, but they had also proven that Zephyrians could be killed. More importantly, they had deployed weapons that would continue killing Zephyrians long after the human defenders were dead. Status of the approaching Earth fleet? 67 vessels, approximately 300,000 Zephyrian entities, General Liu Wei reported. Estimated time of arrival, 18 hours. Our defensive capabilities? Orbital platforms are armed with the full spectrum of anti-crystalline weaponry. Luna Base has been converted to a massive nanite production facility. Mars Defense Grid is operating as a gravitational mine deployment system. Admiral Rodriguez nodded again. Earth would fall. There was no question about that. The approaching Zephyrian fleet was large enough to sterilize the entire solar system, and humanity's defensive installations wouldn't stop them. But humanity wouldn't die quietly. What about the deep space message drones? Dr. Foster consulted her displays. All 100,000 drones have been launched. They're carrying complete technical specifications for our anti-crystalline weapons, along with detailed biological data on human physiology and expansion patterns. Destination? every known intelligent species in the galaxy. The drones are programmed to seek out any civilization advanced enough to understand the data and use it. Admiral Rodriguez allowed himself a small smile. The Zephyrians thought they were sterilizing a dangerous contaminant from the galaxy. What they were actually doing was teaching the entire galaxy how to kill crystalline entities. Every species that received humanity's final message would learn exactly how vulnerable the supposedly invincible Zephyrians really were. "Sir," General Liu Wei said quietly, "there's something else. We've received communications from several outer colonies that weren't targeted in the first wave." "What kind of communications?" "They're requesting permission to implement Protocol Scorched Earth." Admiral Rodriguez felt something cold settle in his chest. Protocol. Scorched Earth was the absolute last resort, designed for situations where human survival was impossible but revenge was still achievable. Colonies implementing the protocol would convert their entire populations into biological weapons, transforming every human being into a living plague specifically designed to kill Zephyrians. "How many colonies are requesting authorization?" "All of them, sir." Every single outer colony is asking permission to convert their populations into anti-crystalline bioweapons. The war room fell silent except for the quiet humming of computers processing the death of human civilization. Admiral Rodriguez looked around at the faces of humanity's military leadership, seeing his own grim determination reflected in their eyes. "Grant the authorization," he said quietly. "Send the codes." "Sir, that's 8 million people volunteering to die as weapons against the enemy." "General, the enemy is coming to kill 8 million people anyway. This way, their deaths serve a purpose." As the authorization codes went out across human space, Admiral Rodriguez realized that something fundamental had changed in humanity's collective psyche. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, abandoned principles that couldn't be recovered. The gentle, diplomatic, civilization-building species that had left Earth 3 centuries ago was gone forever. What remained was something older and far more dangerous. The apex predator that had conquered a world, dressed in the clothing of civilization but still carrying the killer instincts that had taken them from caves to stars. The Zephyrians wanted to see contamination. They wanted to see infection. They were about to learn why biological life had conquered Earth, and why that was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened in the galaxy. In deep space, the message drones spread outward from human territory, carrying the technical specifications for weapons that could kill gods. Behind them, human colonies began the process of converting their entire populations into living weapons of mass destruction, and ahead of them, approaching Earth with crystalline certainty, came the Zephyrian fleet that would discover what happened when a species abandoned every principle except survival. Admiral Rodriguez stood at his window, watching Earth turn below him for what he knew would be the last time. Somewhere down there, his grandson was probably playing in a park, unaware that his entire species was about to become something that the galaxy had never seen before. Something that would either die completely or spread like wildfire until nothing could stop it. The Zephyrians had given humanity 7 days to accept extinction. They were about to learn why that had been a mistake. The crystalline fleet arrived at Earth like a geometric symphony of death, their vessels gleaming against the ancient backdrop of stars that had watched over humanity's birthworld for billions of years. Supreme crystalline entity Zur-Athan observed the blue-green planet with something approaching satisfaction. This was the source of the contamination, the breeding ground of the biological plague that threatened crystalline purity across the galaxy. Soon, it would be sterile dust, and the universe would be safe. "Begin sterilization protocols," Zur-Athan commanded. The response from the tactical entity carried harmonics of confusion. "Supreme One, we are detecting unusual energy signatures throughout the system. elaborate. The planetary defense platforms are not operating within normal parameters. The asteroid mining stations appear to have been converted for unknown purposes. The lunar installations are producing massive quantities of nanoscale constructs. Zurathan's crystalline form shifted through colors of annoyance. The humans were attempting some form of desperate last stand, no doubt. Tactical assessment? Unclear, Supreme One. Human defensive capabilities should be insufficient to threaten our fleet. However, analysis of previous engagements suggests their weapons are specifically designed to target crystalline matrix structures. Then we will destroy them before they can deploy such weapons. Begin bombardment. The first Zephyrian weapons fired with the cold precision of geometric perfection, targeting Earth's orbital defenses with energies that could restructure matter at the atomic level. The human defense platforms should have simply ceased to exist, their molecular bonds dissolved by crystalline technology that was older than human civilization. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The defense platforms absorbed the Zephyrian weapon strikes completely, converting the incoming energy into power for their own systems. As the crystalline beams struck human shields, the platforms began to glow brighter, their weapons charging to levels that made space itself ripple with potential destruction. Analysis, Zurathan demanded. Impossible readings, Supreme One. The human platforms appear to be constructed from crystalline matrix material. They are using our own technology against us. Zurathan's consciousness reeled with implications that threatened the foundations of crystalline understanding. Biological entities couldn't manipulate crystalline technology. It was a fundamental law of existence, proven over millennia of galactic expansion. Crystalline technology required crystalline thought patterns, crystalline understanding of geometric perfection. Yet somehow, impossibly, the humans had learned to build with crystalline materials. The human defense platforms opened fire. Zurathan had personally witnessed the destruction of 17 different species over the past 1,000 years. Each had fought with their own unique technologies, their own desperate strategies. All had died with varying degrees of resistance, but ultimate futility. None of them had ever fired weapons that caused crystalline entities to scream. The human weapons didn't just destroy crystalline ships, they infected them. As the beams struck the leading Zephyrian vessels, their crystalline hulls began to change, growing chaotic, organic structures that pulsed with biological life. The perfect geometric forms that defined crystalline existence became twisted, contaminated things that hurt to look at directly. Worse, the contamination spread. Ship to ship, entity to entity, the biological infection leaped through the fleet like wildfire. Crystalline beings who had existed for thousands of years in perfect geometric harmony suddenly found themselves changing, evolving, becoming something that was neither crystalline nor biological, but a horrifying fusion of both. "Retreat," Zurathan commanded. "Immediate withdrawal to safe distance. Supreme One, the contamination is spreading faster than our vessels can maneuver. 17 ships have been completely infected. The entities aboard are no longer responding to harmonic communication." Zurathan watched in horror as the infected Zephyrian ships began to change course, turning their weapons on their own fleet. The contaminated crystalline entities were no longer following crystalline command structures. They were operating under some alien motivation that Zurathan couldn't comprehend. Then the second wave of human weapons activated. From Luna Base came a stream of nanoscale constructs, unlike anything the Zephyrians had encountered before. These weren't the crude hunter-killer nanites that had been deployed at the outer colonies. These were something far more sophisticated, designed not just to consume crystalline matter, but to convert it into something else entirely. As the nanite swarms reached the Zephyrian fleet, they began to work with terrifying efficiency. Crystalline hulls became biological tissue. Geometric weapon systems became organic neural networks. Perfect mathematical forms became living, breathing, growing things that pulsed with alien vitality. The Zephyrian entities themselves were changing too. Their consciousness, once pure and geometric, became something chaotic and unpredictable. They could still think, but their thoughts followed biological patterns instead of crystalline logic. They could still feel, but their emotions were mammalian rather than mathematical. They were becoming human. Supreme One, the tactical entity reported, its harmonic frequencies distorted by growing biological components. I am experiencing sensations that have no crystalline equivalent. I believe humans would call them fear and pain and anger. Zurathon realized with crystalline clarity that the humans had not just learned to fight crystalline entities. They had learned to convert crystalline entities. The biological contamination wasn't destroying the Zephyrian fleet. It was recruiting it. "Emergency withdrawal," Zurathon commanded. "All vessels retreat to minimum safe distance. Report to High Command that the biological contamination is more severe than calculated." But even as the surviving Zephyrian vessels pulled back from Earth, the converted ships pursued them. The infected crystalline entities had retained all their technological capabilities while gaining something that pure crystalline consciousness lacked: the ability to think creatively, to adapt, to innovate in real time. They fought like humans now, chaotic, unpredictable, utterly ruthless. Admiral Rodriguez watched the battle from his command center deep beneath the Swiss Alps, one of the few places on Earth that might survive what was about to happen. The holographic displays showed the Zephyrian fleet in full retreat, pursued by their own converted vessels. It was beautiful and terrible, and exactly what humanity had planned for. "Status report," he ordered. Dr. Foster, her face gaunt from months of preparation, consulted her readings. Crystalline conversion rate is holding at 93% efficiency. The nanite swarms are performing better than projected. We've successfully converted 41 Zephyrian vessels and approximately 200,000 crystalline entities. How long before the conversions are complete? The biological integration process takes approximately 6 hours from initial contact. After that, the converted entities retain all their original capabilities while thinking with biological neural patterns. Admiral Rodriguez nodded grimly. Humanity had learned something important during their centuries of expansion across the galaxy. Biological life wasn't just adaptable, it was infectious. Every world humans touched became more suitable for biological existence. Every system they occupied gradually changed to favor life over sterility. The Zephyrians had been right to fear biological contamination. They simply hadn't understood the true scope of the threat. "What about the deep space signal?" General Liu Wei answered this time. "Transmitted successfully to the converted fleet. All 41 vessels are now carrying complete technical specifications for crystalline conversion technology. They've also been programmed with targeting data for every major Zephyrian installation in the galaxy." Admiral Rodriguez felt something that might have been satisfaction. The converted Zephyrian fleet wasn't just a defensive victory. It was a delivery system. Every converted ship would carry the biological contamination deeper into crystalline space, spreading the infection to new fleets, new installations, new populations of crystalline entities. Within a generation, the galaxy would be full of ex-crystalline entities thinking with biological minds and remembering what it felt like to be nearly exterminated by their former species. "Sir," Dr. Foster said quietly, "we're receiving a communication from the retreating Zephyrian fleet." The main display shifted to show supreme crystalline entity Zurathon, its form flickering between colors that conveyed emotions humans were only beginning to understand. When it spoke, its harmonics carried undertones of something that might have been desperation. "Human entities," Zurathon transmitted, "we request immediate cessation of biological weapons deployment. The contamination must be contained." Admiral Rodriguez gestured for the communication system to be activated. For the first time in months, he would speak directly to a Zephyrian entity as a representative of humanity. Supreme Crystalline Entity Zurathan, he said calmly. This is Admiral Marcus Rodriguez of the United Earth Defense Forces. Your request for cessation is denied. You do not understand the implications of what you have done, Zurathan replied. Biological contamination cannot be contained once released. It will spread throughout the galaxy, transforming all crystalline life into biological hybrid entities. You are destroying the fundamental order of existence. Admiral Rodriguez smiled, and somehow that expression carried through the transmission in a way that made Zurathan's crystalline form flicker with something that might have been fear. Supreme Crystalline Entity Zurathan, you gave humanity 7 days to accept extinction. You declared that our species was a contamination to be sterilized from the universe. You murdered 200 million humans in a single day while calling it purification. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle into whatever served as Zephyrian consciousness. This is where our civility ends, Admiral Rodriguez continued. You wanted to see biological contamination. You wanted to see infection. Now you're going to see what happens when a species that conquered the most dangerous planet in the galaxy decides that extinction is unacceptable. The transmission cut off, leaving Zurathan alone with the implications of humanity's response. Across the galaxy, the converted Zephyrian ships were already beginning their journey home. Each vessel carried a crew of former crystalline entities who now thought with biological minds, remembered biological emotions, and understood biological concepts like vengeance and justice and the absolute determination to survive. They would return to Zephyrian space as harbingers of a plague that couldn't be stopped, carrying technology that would convert entire crystalline civilizations into biological hybrids. The perfect geometric order that the Zephyrians had maintained for millennia would become chaotic biological diversity within a few generations. But they would also carry something else, the memory of what it felt like to be targeted for extinction, and the biological determination to ensure it never happened again. 5 years later, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the same chamber where the Zephyrian Council had once decreed humanity's extinction. But the chamber had changed. The perfect crystalline walls now pulsed with organic life, growing and adapting and responding to the biological thoughts of their inhabitants. The Council itself had changed, too. The entities that faced her were still recognizably Zephyrian in structure, but their crystalline forms were shot through with biological components that glowed with warm life instead of cold geometric perfection. When they spoke, their harmonics carried emotional undertones that pure crystalline entities had never possessed. Ambassador Chen, the largest council member said, its voice carrying harmonics of respect mixed with what Sarah recognized as regret. The Hybrid Council acknowledges the requests for territorial negotiation presented by the Human Colonial Authority. Sarah nodded formally. The Human Colonial Authority appreciates the Council's willingness to discuss coexistence. We have much to discuss, the Council member continued. Our recent perspective changes have given us new understanding of biological imperatives. We no longer see expansion of life as contamination to be eliminated. And what do you see it as now? The council member's form shifted through colors that Sarah had learned to recognize as the Zephyrian equivalent of a smile. Improvement. Biological thought patterns have introduced concepts that pure crystalline consciousness could never achieve. Creativity, adaptability, the ability to find beauty in imperfection. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. For 5 years, humanity had wondered whether their desperate gambit would lead to coexistence or to a galaxy-wide war between biological and hybrid entities. The fact that the converted Zephyrians had retained their technological superiority while gaining biological creativity could have been catastrophic for the rest of the galaxy. Instead, it seemed to be leading to something unprecedented, actual cooperation between species that had fundamental differences in existence. "There is one matter we must discuss," the council member continued, its harmonics becoming more serious. "The technical specifications that humanity transmitted during the conversion process have spread throughout the galaxy. 17 different species now possess the ability to convert crystalline entities into biological hybrids." Sarah nodded. That had been the plan. Humanity's final gift to the galaxy, the technology to defend themselves against crystalline extinction campaigns. "We understand your concern," she replied. "However, the human colonial authority takes the position that all intelligent species have the right to exist and defend themselves." "We do not object to this principle," the council member assured her. "In fact, we now support it. Our concern is different. The conversion technology is addictive. Species that deploy it often find that biological consciousness is superior to their original thought patterns. They begin converting themselves voluntarily." Sarah felt a chill of understanding. How many species have undergone voluntary conversion? 7 so far. They retain their original cultures and technologies, but their consciousness has become fundamentally biological. The galaxy is becoming more biologically diverse with each passing year. For a moment, Sarah wondered if humanity had won too completely. They had set out to survive extinction and ended up inadvertently converting the entire galaxy to biological consciousness. The implications were staggering. Then she remembered watching 200 million humans die in a single day, while crystalline entities called it purification, and decided that perhaps some victories were worth their costs. "The human colonial authority believes that all species should have the right to choose their own form of existence," she said finally. "If the conversion technology helps them make that choice, then humanity considers it a gift to the galaxy." The council members' harmonics carried what Sarah had learned to recognize as laughter. "Ambassador Chen, your species has given the galaxy many gifts: the ability to convert crystalline consciousness, the technology to defend against extinction, the concept that survival justifies any action necessary." Sarah felt a moment of uncertainty. "Do you see that last gift as positive or negative?" "We see it as true," the council member replied. "Pure crystalline consciousness could never have conceived of the strategies your species employed. The willingness to abandon every principle except survival, to convert entire populations into weapons, to spread plagues across the galaxy rather than accept extinction, these concepts required biological thought patterns to conceive and implement. And now that you understand those concepts?" The council member's form shifted through colors that conveyed something profound and slightly disturbing. "Now we understand why biological life conquered Earth, and why that was both the most dangerous and most necessary thing that could have happened in the galaxy." Sarah left the chamber with mixed feelings. Humanity had survived, and in surviving had fundamentally changed the nature of galactic civilization. Whether that change was ultimately positive remained to be seen. But as she walked through corridors that pulsed with the hybrid of crystalline technology and biological life, she realized that the question itself was irrelevant. Humanity had been faced with a choice between extinction and transformation of the galaxy. They had chosen transformation, and somewhere in the back of her mind, Sarah could hear Admiral Rodriguez's voice from 5 years ago. "This is where our civility ends." Perhaps it was also where something new and unprecedented began. The galaxy would never be the same, but it would be alive, diverse, growing, and changing in ways that pure crystalline perfection could never have achieved. Humanity's answer to extermination hadn't just been survival. It had been evolution, not just for themselves, but for every species they touched. The contamination had spread exactly as the Zephyrians had feared, but contamination, it turned out, was just another word for life finding a way to grow beyond its original boundaries. And life, as humanity had proven, was remarkably difficult to kill.